We'll see how they do on appeal, but no doubt that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, Ari, when you evaluate your own properties for the purpose of insurance or the purpose of getting a loan from a bank, it comes basically with language that says this is our assessment. Then the banks step in, they do their assessment on how much the property is valued. And in none of those cases involving the Trump Organization did any of these parties bring any litigation against the Trump Organization for any false representation, correct?
No, that is exactly right. And nobody has ever accused any of these New York bankers or insurance people of being behind the ball. I mean, these guys are pretty sharp at what they do, and they know how to sharpen their pencils. So all of this is why I put this in a political category, not a legal category. It's one of the reasons the norms have broken down in this country. Because when the Democrats go to these kind of resorts to get somebody they don't like, we all lose faith in the system. You know, it's the same thing as 2 impeachments that violated the rules of the House. It's all just to get the man they don't want. And the perverse result of it is they're going to get the man they don't want. As a result of all these prosecutions, Donald Trump leapfrogged in the Republican nomination. If they had really wanted to get rid of Trump, they wouldn't have prosecuted him, and then Ron DeSantis actually may have had a chance back in January of 2023. But these indictments led to the rallying of the base because it made people question justice, which has been a 4-year pattern when Donald Trump was president. So it's the most foolish thing the Democrats could do unless they want Donald Trump to return to power.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, you know, ignoring some of this might have produced a different outcome. When you think about 91 indictments against this individual, and Shannon, you know, just looking at other civil cases which have a monetary price tag on them, as I said, this is not a criminal case that he was in here. I looked back, O.J. Simpson was found civilly liable in the deaths of 2 people. His wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, who was at the property at the time, $33 million. In the deaths of 2 human beings in one of the most high-profile cases in American history.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, there were clearly victims in that case, which keeps going back to this argument about nobody complained. Everybody got paid back in this case. So regardless of how you feel about the outcome, when the president, former president, and his supporters have this argument that it's political, it certainly looks that way, especially with the clips that you played earlier. Now, something interesting to note, we had out new Fox polling this week. You and I on the road have talked to folks in New Hampshire and Iowa and everywhere in between who've said they would not move away from President Trump if he was indicted or convicted. Now, there is some softening there if he's convicted on a criminal charge. But this new polling we have out of critical states, New Hampshire and Michigan this week, found that more Biden supporters are worried about his mental acuity than Trump supporters are worried about his legal issues. Right. So again, this will rally most of the base to him. It forced all of his GOP rivals to run to his defense every time he was indicted. And as Ari points out, I mean, it cleared the field in a very different way. But voters say, for the majority of Trump supporters, it's not going to move them. They're not going to waver in the face of verdicts like this.
No, you're absolutely right, Shannon. There's no indication in any of the polling that this has a negative impact on the Trump campaign. And if anything, it has a positive impact because when they see him under attack in some element of their own lives, you know, many people feel like they understand what it's like to be under the thumb of the government or of the law in one way or the other. And they rally to him and support him, which has been just a fascinating political phenomenon to watch.
You know, Martha, I just have such a hard time seeing any of the court cases, including this one, as anything other than a continuation of the resistance that began when Donald Trump was elected president, and instantly protesters took to the streets of Fifth Avenue against Donald Trump. To me, when you look at all these cases, the one thing they keep having in common is they're being brought against the former president in the bluest of blue counties across the United States of America. Because if they were brought in a purple county, let alone a red county, they probably would have no chance of success, whether it was a jury or a judge rendering a verdict. And so I just think this is a continuation of the nastiness that law has turned into to serve the political ends, as Letitia James, as you pointed out, the Attorney General of New York, campaigned on getting Donald Trump. And I remember when she said that. I'm a New Yorker. I remember when she was a candidate and she vowed to do that. And it struck me as an absolute miscarriage of justice then when she made the promise. And now that she's delivered on it, it's an even bigger miscarriage.
This also, the judge says that the Trump Organization must install an independent director of compliance, and says its independent monitor shall continue in her role, it says, for at least 3 years. Shannon, you know, of all the cases that have come against the former president, this one, I would say, and the hush money Stormy Daniels case, you know, sort of was problematic in terms of the interpretation of a lot of people who study the law, as you do. Now, in this case, none of the banks came forward. None of these real estate investment companies came forward and said that the Trump Organization failed to repay them. They claimed that the Mar-a-Lago estate, for example, was, I believe, worth $18 million, which is preposterous for anybody who's looked for, you know, a cottage in Palm Beach. You couldn't get one of those in that neighborhood. So, you know, it's really shocking how political this appears to be in going after him. Let's play those Letitia James comments when she was running for to be the Attorney General. Watch this.
No one is above the law, including this illegitimate president. I look forward to going into the office of Attorney General every day, suing him, defending your rights, and then going home.
I say one name, Donald Trump. That should motivate you.
Will you sue him for us?
Oh, we're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the
Oh my
He's
gosh.
going to know my name personally.
Every time I see that, Shannon, it's pretty shocking behavior from someone who, you know, wants to be an attorney general.
Yeah, and in the line she has there about nobody is above the law, his folks will say nobody's below it either. You cannot simply use the law as a cudgel and go after somebody in a way that appears political. This lends credence to the argument that President Trump makes over and over, that it's not just a prosecution, these are persecutions. And his base is going to rally to that every time this happens. We got to remember, too, that as you noted there, and as he continues to note, there weren't, quote, victims here. There weren't people that came forward and demanded justice from the Attorney General. So in New York, even though we're referring to this as the Supreme Court, they have unusual language that they use in New York. It's not their final court of appeal. Their court of appeals is actually above their state Supreme Court. So the Trump team feels like on so many different counts, they've got a really strong measure on appeal. No doubt that they're going to take every penny of this to appeal. So what happens in the meantime? A lot of this has been put on hold, taking the business licenses and those kinds of things. So we'll see how they do on appeal, but no doubt that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, Ari, when you evaluate your own properties for the purpose of insurance or the purpose of getting a loan from a bank, it comes basically with language that says this is our assessment.
Your Honor, I understand. I just would.
It's marked as Exhibit 22, and we'll move from there.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, you were asked a little bit about this book before, correct?
I think Mrs. Merchant.
Ms. Merchant did.
Asked me some questions, yes.
And you gave about 6 interviews to the authors of this book in a sit-down?
No, sir.
You didn't?
No.
Was it?
She answered how many interviews she gave, in her opinion.
How many, in your opinion, do you believe you gave, and how long did they last?
2 to 3, maybe 20, 30 minutes.
So your testimony is at most, you think that you gave maybe an hour to an hour and a half's interview to the authors of this book?
Oh, you mean in total?
In total, yeah.
Maybe, yeah. Anywhere between, definitely not more than 2-ish hours.
Okay. But you also were telling, when they were, the title of the book, of course, is A Hard-Charging Georgia Prosecutor, a Rogue President, and the Plot to Steal American Election. You've seen that.
Why is the title of the book relevant, sir?
And I had no.
And then I'm going to ask her whether or not that was the theme that they gave her when they talked with her.
What the thing gave her, what do you mean by that?
Well, because they were sat down and they told her why they were there to interview her.
And why does that matter?
Well, I think it matters because it shows, but they want her to give her version of what her life story is. This is almost a life story of her. So that's why it's relevant. But if the court thinks it's not, then...
No, it could be relevant to your issue of the forensic misconduct that has been alleged and maybe some of the motives at play when it comes to forensic misconduct. But I'm not seeing, again, what we're here for today was the relationship and or any financial elements of it.
Correct. Well, I think it clearly relevant to the forensic misconduct, also relevant to the personal interest in terms of the finances.
I didn't make 10 cents off that book.
Pardon me?
I didn't make 10 cents off that book. I
Didn't ask whether you made any money.
Okay, I just.
Didn't ask whether you made any money.
Do you have any other statements that she hadn't already been confronted with by Ms. Merchant?
Well, other than I want to focus on when you were telling them about your financial straits and you were living kind of month to month, that is what your financial status was back in 2018 after your election.
Mr. Gillen, we covered that at length, and you're at the end of the line. I'm sorry about that, but we've got to find new ground.
Well, let me move on to my point here. So the point is that what you're telling us is that you were in financial straits, but really that your testimony today is you had a cash hoard of maybe up to $10,000 in cash where you laid your head at night so that you would dip out and there would be no record of it, correct?
That's not what I'm telling you, sir. That's not at all what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you is that throughout the course of my life, I have always kept cash in my house. That cash has ranged from times, my father would probably be ashamed of this because he would say it should be more, but that cash at times has ranged from $500 to maybe $9,000.